Are you tired of people picking on your backhand? Have you ever thought about quitting table tennis because your backhand is so bad? Has lack of confidence in your backhand kept you up at night? Well, let me break it to you. That new rubber you're thinking about isn't going to solve your backhand. But you know what will solve your backhand? With a one-time small payment of your left kidney, you can get access to the 15 most common mistakes people make with their backhand and how to fix them.
Hello and welcome back to Pechpong. I hope you enjoyed that little intro I made. And no, you don't have to give me your left kidney if you want to watch this video, but hopefully it'll still help your backhand. So today we're going to be going over the top 15 killer mistakes that people make when trying to make a good backhand loop. These are the most common mistakes I find when teaching, and we'll also be going over clever different ways I've used to accelerate the learning process so you can fix those problems as quick as possible. Many of these mistakes I was making myself when I was younger as I was developing a better backhand. A lot of the coaches would tell me like, Seth, you need to open your racket more, but they didn't exactly tell me how I should go about training to achieve that. And I'm excited to share with you guys the exact ways that I figured out how to accelerate the learning process. I've bookmarked different sections in this video so that if one section doesn't exactly pertain to you, you can just simply skip to the next one that's a little bit more relevant to your stroke. So right off the bat, I want to give the tip that you should be using a robot or a multi-ball giver to work on fixing your backhand. It's very important that you have a single ball going to a single spot so that you can work on very specific things. And with that being said, let's get started. Okay, so the first one we're going to go over is racket angle control. And there are three main ways that people mess up racket angle control. And the first one is that sometimes people try and make spin by going around the ball. And this is not a really good way to make spin, as you're changing the angle very quickly and you're also not achieving more spin by doing this. So I would say just try to keep the angle nice and steady and straight throughout the stroke. Try not to make spin by going around the ball. The second one that's a real killer that a lot of people do that they don't notice they're doing is raising the lower lip of the racket as they're hitting the shot. And when you raise the lower lip, you're not able to get spin because you're not able to get the ball to roll on the racket. You're just simply kind of changing the angle while you're hitting the shot. This usually develops when a player hits the ball in the net a few times and their kind of inner caveman comes out and they start trying to lift the ball as they're doing the stroke, and so consequently they start getting the ball over the net, but they start doing without spin. And the more they go down this path, the less potential their backhand has. And the third way that racket angle control is destroyed is the lack of going around the elbow in the stroke. If the elbow is kind of moving back and forth, the racket is not able to rotate and kind of make a good friction on the ball. So it's very important that you keep that elbow in place and you rotate around the elbow. Two really good drills that you can do that will help you have better racket angle control. And the first one is rolling the ball off the edge of the table and working on spinning the ball up just as it creeps over the edge. And this will help you to have good spin, and it'll also have a better racket angle control because it's very hard to spin the ball over the net if you're changing the racket angle. So it kind of forces you to have a good angle. And the second method is to go outside and throw a frisbee. This will really help you to rotate around the elbow, as it's not really possible to throw a frisbee if your elbow is moving. You're probably just going to end up tossing the frisbee a few feet as opposed to flicking it, getting it to glide across a field. So going outside and learning how to throw a frisbee and getting that same exact feeling in your backhand will really help your rotation around the elbow. So the next problem we're going to go over is timing the ball. Backhand is a lot about timing, and if you mess up the timing for the backhand, a lot of these faults go hand in hand. So if you mess up the timing, you might also have very poor racket angle control, like we talked about in the last problem. You fix one and you might fix the other, and if you're doing one wrong, you might also do another thing wrong, and it kind of is a domino effect. But we're going to be going over two main problems in this section for timing. And those are specifically reaching too much for the ball. There are two kinds of reaching that we'll go over here. The first one is a reach where you actually kind of make a nice stroke on the ball. It'll work, but it's not very good if you want to continue developing as a player. And the second one we're going to go over is reaching for the ball and not really making any stroke, where you're just kind of poking at the ball. I like to describe backhand timing that it's a lot like an arcade game or an iPhone game, where you usually have like a dot or something moving across the screen, and you have to time it and hit it exactly at a certain point in order to win the game. And that's a lot like the backhand, because the ball is coming and you have to wait for it to come exactly to this perfect little hitting spot, and then you release your arm, your shoulder, your elbow, and your wrist, and then you make a good stroke. If you mistime that and you try and swing a little bit too early or a little bit too late, you're going to get the ball going in many different directions. So getting the right timing is actually one of the hardest parts of the backhand. A good method to teach this, and maybe you've seen it in the past, is I grab a chair and I put it right at the end of the table, and I tell the player that they're not allowed to touch the ball until the ball crosses over the line of the top of the chair. And try to stay pretty close to the chair. If you go too far back from the chair, you can end up still just reaching for the ball, and that's really not what we want. So as I said earlier, there are many different ways you can mess up timing, and we'll address those later on in the video. So yeah, let's move on to the next one. So the next one is a closed open stroke or a stuck on top of the ball. And I put these two together because the fix will be the same. And this one really hits close to home for me, because for many years I really struggled with hitting on top of the ball, as well as taking a very closed backswing. I had a lot of different coaches tell me that I was hitting too much on top of the ball and being too closed. And I was also hitting a lot of edges. And so my only option when trying to lift heavy backspin balls or trying to get balls over was to swing faster, because when you swing fast you get a little bit more lift, and that's not really what you want to do if you want to be more consistent. The other problem was having a closed to open kind of backswing and follow through, and I don't know why some people do this, but they kind of take the racket back really close, and then on the follow through they try to open it as they swing. You really want to try and develop an open racket angle and then go from open to kind of closed as you swing. And this will let you kind of work on opening your angle for those heavy backspins, as well as it'll also ensure better contact, because you're able to work into the ball as opposed to kind of brushing the backside of the ball, and sometimes you don't really get the best contact. So how do we fix these two problems? And for me, the process of fixing this was a little bit uncomfortable, and it was very new territory for me, especially because changing the racket angle on the backhand side specifically really feels uncomfortable. And I use the place method. And the place method is kind of like you place the racket in the proper position in the backswing, and then the ball comes and then you stroke, instead of kind of taking a backswing and a follow through all at once while the ball's coming. You kind of prepare the backswing, and then you wait for the ball to come, and you make sure you're in the right position beforehand before you swing. So that's the place method, and that is the method I use to fix this problem. And for me, my racket angle was very closed on the backswing, and like I said, I was stuck on top of the ball. And for me, it was just getting that wrist kind of down and open. And so I would place the racket right there, bending my wrist nicely. And then from there, all I did was wait for the ball and then make a nice follow through stroke and make sure I got spin on the ball. And the more I did this, the more I felt comfortable with the new position. And eventually I was able to kind of remember the position, so that when I did it in a normal game or a normal practice, it was very seamless and I didn't feel like I had to do the place method. So at first it was basically just one position open, and then I started to feel all the positions, like, oh, I want to go really open for this one, or I want to go kind of open. And it became more of a second nature to adjust the angle. And that was just because I broke my habit of doing that one top of the ball wrist back position. Okay, so the next problem we're going to be going over is striking the inside of the ball. And this one develops because of timing again, and specifically late timing. So it means you waited too long and your wrist is kind of in this back position, and you start striking the inside of the ball. And like we said before, the ball will go to the left side of the table. And what happens is, instead of starting to time the ball right, what players end up doing is they start trying to pull on the side of the ball, kind of creating side spin, and they also start holding their wrist in this back position, and it becomes a really bad habit of just kind of hitting on the inside of the ball, pulling to the right, and not actually making good top spin And yeah, it just kind of gets out of control. So what we want to be doing is actually touching the left side of the ball. And this is the kind of standard way of hitting a backhand, is touching the left side of the ball. Some players touch more on the left, some players touch a little bit more on the back of the ball. But ideally, you don't want to be stuck on the right side of the ball. That doesn't mean you always want to be on the left side. Sometimes it can be good to play on the right side of the ball and kind of play that inside out shot that kind of curves out away from the player on the down the line shot. But ideally you want to be touching on the left side, as it follows the natural way of the body, and it's very easy to be consistent. So what we want to do to fix this is we want to try and use contrast training. And contrast training is where you do the opposite of what you're currently doing in excess. So for example, on this one, since you're touching the inside right side of the ball, we want to try and touch the far left side of the ball and kind of get that contrast between the two. Then you'll gain more awareness in your hand and your timing, and you'll be able to then maybe strike more of the back of the ball, which is what you want to be doing. So what we want to be doing is kind of getting that Michael Mays-esque shot and really hooking around that left side of the ball. And the nice thing about contrast training is you're not actually trying to get the ball on the table, you're just trying to make a stroke that is in contrast to the one you're doing and gain more awareness. So you can be a little bit more free about it and just kind of discover the new feeling. So one tip I can give is you probably don't want to be touching the ball with the racket too vertical, and that's because it might be very hard to make contact. I would encourage more trying to touch more of the back left side and kind of swing a little bit this way as opposed to this way, and try to get a little bit more underneath the ball, as that's a little bit easier to make contact. So this next one is called stopping the follow through short, and this one can happen to good players and beginning players alike. A lot of times the good players learn how to make friction on the ball, and to accentuate that friction feeling, they kind of stop the racket. And this can be a good thing because they learn how to make spin, but then they need to progress into the final stroke, which is getting that wrist down with the tip down and the wrist up in that full finish follow through, so that you're getting the most out of the stroke, the most spin and speed that's potential. And then on top of that, a lot of times players, when I tell them to finish the follow through, instead of finishing the follow through, they kind of lift the elbow up to fake finishing the follow through. And like I said earlier, we want to really make sure we're rotating around the elbow. And a really good way to do that is kind of place that left arm on the arm there and make sure you hold it in place. And so you get that good feedback of rotating around the elbow, which can be very helpful for advanced players and beginning players alike. So the next one is called low wrist movement. And as I'm teaching beginners, a lot of times I encourage not to use too much wrist in the backhand, because then it lets them focus on going around the elbow, and it also promotes better timing. If we start with a lot of wrist in the beginning, it can be very difficult to get the right angles and also get the timing for the ball. And also the speed and spin is quite out of control, and they have this lack of control feeling. So once we establish that we have a nice stroke and we're moving around the elbow and we're timing the ball, I think it's time to get a little bit more wrist. And a lot of players get stuck here and they never kind of take this next step. And to take this next step, I use the place method. And what I do is I tell them to place that wrist with the tip kind of pointing down. And I tell them to wait for the ball and then go from tip down to tip up. And from there, they're able to make good wrist movement and also get more spin and speed. So once they get the place method correct with the tip down to tip up, I like to start going on to the next step, which is adding a little bit more fluidity into their stroke. And you do that by starting to flick the racket. And you flick the racket by relaxing the wrist, and you want to relax it and get it into those tip down and tip up positions, but with a little bit more fluidity throughout the swing. Okay, so the next fault we're going to be covering is touching too much on the side of the body. And this one is very prevalent amongst tennis players because they're used to playing from the side of their body with their backhand.
What could happen, the different possible combinations for the men's singles final? What? Two-handed backhand for a winner! Two-handed backhand from 15 feet behind the table. Who does that?
If you're touching the ball way out to the side, you're probably going to lose a lot of consistency and maybe even a little bit of power. So it's really important to try and touch the ball in front of the body. And the specific point is actually dependent on the player. A lot of players like to touch the ball directly in front of the belly button, and some players also like to touch it a little bit left of the belly button. So it really depends on you as a player and what you're comfortable with. There is no real exact one way to do it. I've seen players do it both ways. So the main obstacle to touching the ball in the front of the body is going to be the movement. Because the ball is going pretty much everywhere, you're going to have to move into position so that you can stay in front of the ball. So there are two kinds of movements that we'll go over that'll help you to stay more in front of the ball. And the first one is using both feet. So you want to be on your tippy toes and have the ability to kind of jump around with both feet moving at the same time. And that way you can get in front of the ball. The next method we can use is the one-step moving, and Timo Boll talked a little bit about this on his YouTube channel. And traditionally, I feel like coaches teach players to use both feet all the time, and it was really cool to see Timo Boll discussing how you can use one-step movements to kind of make quick transitions to get in the right position. The main problem with this is if you take that one step, it's really important that you get back into position, or else you might start taking one step one direction and then taking another step the other, and your feet just get wider and wider, and then you end up not being able to move at all. So it's really important that when you use the one-step movement that you bring your foot back into position so you can move again. So the next fault we're going to be covering is taking the backswing too early. And you're looking at the master himself. I was extremely good at taking the backswing too early and botching the timing. And what this means is before the ball is coming, before you know the speed of the ball, whether it's slow or fast, players like me would take a backswing, usually too big, and I would be kind of messed up if the ball came too fast, and I would end up getting really stuck and really messing up the timing. So what you ideally want to do is you want to wait and see how fast the ball is coming to you before you take your backswing. That way you know if it's a fast ball, you can take a shorter backswing, and if it's a slower ball, then you have a little bit more time and you can take a little bit bigger of a stroke, a little bit more aggressive of a stroke, and that way you can get the timing correct. You can work on this by having a multi-ball giver, or maybe your robot, giving you different speeds, and sometimes a little bit slower and sometimes a little bit faster. And the idea is to, like I said, keep the racket in front, and if it's faster, make a very short, quick stroke. And if it's slower, then you can kind of take that bigger stroke. This kind of drill I spent many hours on, and I will also spend many more continuing to practice, because I feel like it's something that if you just keep practicing, you'll get better and better. And like I said, backhand is all about timing. And so the next fault is called dropping the hand too much on topspin balls. A lot of players do this. When the ball is coming, they take their hand down very much, and they try to swing from low to high on a topspin ball. And what ends up happening is they hit a lot of edges, and they also mistime a lot of shots. I think sometimes this problem can be born out of a fear of hitting into the net because the racket angle is too closed. And so a lot of times players will try and take the hand down a lot more than they should just to try to get a little bit more lift on the ball because their racket angle is too closed. And it's kind of like one problem leading into the next. So what you really want to be doing is having that racket angle nice and open, keeping the hand nice and high, and going kind of very much through the shot against topspin balls. So the next one is called no legs on the underspin loop. And as you're beginning to learn how to loop underspin, a lot of times players don't get underneath the ball or sit into the shot as much as they should. And they're leaving out a whole lever of potential that they could use to lift the ball. So what you want to do is you want to, as the ball comes to you, you want to kind of sit down or get underneath the ball, and then right as you're about to hit the stroke, you want to spring up with your legs to get a little bit more lift on the ball to help you lift those heavy backspin balls. A side tip is to try and keep your chest very much forward as you're hitting the shot, as sometimes players kind of lean back as they hit the shot, and this can kind of throw your swing out of whack and make you change the angle of your shot and also get you to whiff a lot of balls. So the next one kind of strikes a little bit too close to home because it's something I currently do and am working on. It's something that I have gotten better at but haven't completely eliminated in my game, and that is the left hand kind of going back more and more as I do more and more backhands. And what happens is if the left hand is kind of back here like this when you're playing, the only thing you can really do is kind of poke at the ball. Very hard to get really good power if your left hand is kind of back like this. So what you really want to do is try to train and keep that left hand forward so you can continue to make really good powerful strokes and not let it kind of creep back as you play. So the next one is called taking too big of a swing. And this is a problem that I had and a lot of younger players, I mean pretty much anyone can have, but the problem usually springs up when you watch high-level players play, you see them taking these really big backhand swings. And the thought process, for me at least, was, okay, they're taking these big swings, so should I. And maybe I was messing up the timing, but I thought, it's okay, I'll just get used to the timing because I see these high-level players doing it, so I'll do it too. And I think there's a better way to progress, and that is to take very small, consistent swings. And for me, it came to a point where I was losing in tournaments, having very low confidence in my backhand, and I noticed that when I take smaller swings, I was having a lot more consistency. So I thought, okay, forget the big swing, I'm just going to forget about it, I'm going to do smaller swings from now, and hopefully I can kind of build it up as I get better and better. And that's exactly what happened, is I would play for a couple months and then my swing would get a little bit bigger, and then eventually it became to the point where I am now, where I really feel very comfortable taking bigger swings because I built it up properly. So I would highly encourage taking very small swings and building up from there. So this next one is called going out of control after one loop. And typically this happens when I'm working with a student and they're able to make good loops when I'm doing multi-ball, or they're working with a robot. And working with a robot or multi-ball is very different than doing a one ball or if I'm blocking to them. And what happens is I start blocking to them and they're able to do one loop really well, and then I block it back, and the second one, the technique kind of starts to break down because the timing is different. And what ends up happening is that progressively the stroke gets worse and worse and we're practicing bad techniques. So the way around this is to build it up. And you do that by looping one and then countering one. Looping one and countering one. And this lets the player kind of resettle, regain their thoughts, and also get the ball back under control in their head so that they can make another good technical loop. And from there, once they get the feeling for making one loop, one counter, one loop, one counter, then they can move into making two loops, one counter. And then obviously they can move into the final stage where they're looping 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a row, and they're not losing control and also practicing bad techniques. So this is a really good way to solve the looping one and then going out of control problem. Alright, so that's the video. I hope you learned a lot and that you can improve your backhand. I also hope that my personal experiences and my woes of my backhand can speed up your learning process, as I already made those mistakes. And hopefully you don't have to make them too. Let me know in the comments section which problems you have, or maybe different creative ways you figured out how to solve your backhand problems. And I'll see you guys in the next video.